I'm going to start this morning, if you'll indulge me, with a quick story. The young man in the middle of this picture in the orange t-shirt is Breton Hawksworth. Breton is 15 years old. He lives in Newport, Vermont. He's a junior ROTC cadet, and if you know anything about like oncology and serious illness, you can look at this kid and immediately know that he is very, very, very sick. And tragically, this was taken about 3 weeks ago. Tragically, Breton will probably not be with us beyond, say, the end of next week. Certainly not by the end of next month. So he had two dying wishes. One, he wanted to see an active volcano, but he got too sick for that. He couldn't go to Hawaii. They had it all laid on, but he couldn't leave the hospital anymore. He had like 5 tumors that came back, so that wish had to kind of be put on the shelf. And he had another wish, which was to meet a Green Beret. Great, right? How easy is that? I cannot think of a more noble mission to be given than to grant the dying wish of a child, right? And any parent in here or in the world will attest to the nobility of that. Those rarely come across our desk, right? And so Breton's wish made its way all the way from Vermont, all the way down to North Carolina, into Echo 2029, and then it ran smack dab into our bureaucracy. And the lawyers got a hold of it, and they did what I suppose lawyers are paid to do, right? They looked at it and said, we can't really do this. It's illegal. We can't pay to have soldiers go up there. And so a bunch of really well-meaning people tried to come up with a solution so that this kid's dying wish could be granted, to meet a Green Beret. So they said, oh, well, yeah, maybe we could VTC. We love to VTC. That's what we do. That's what we're doing today, right? So we'll VTC into the kids' room on a civilian side, and we'll Skype in. And so we'll Skype into the dying child's hospital room so that he can meet a Green Beret. So we got wind of it and said, hey, hold on a second. Let us see if we can find a person that can help. And we started making a few phone calls. And I got a hold of the gentleman directly to the right of Breton. His name is Mike Kearns, Captain Mike Kearns. He is a team leader in Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion, 19th Special Forces Group out of Rhode Island. So I called up Mike. I laid out the situation for him, and his response to me was 3 words: I got it. That was it. I got it. 48 hours later, Mike Kearns, along with 5 other Green Berets that he rallied to this cause, showed up in Breton's hospital room. And not only did they grant this kid's wish to a factor of 5, but they walked in there with a 3-star note from General Cleveland, a certificate naming this kid an honorary member of USASOC, a certificate naming him an honorary Green Beret, a uniform with his name on it, and patches, hats, ball caps, T-shirts, coins, the works, right? They granted this kid his wish, and it started with Mike Kearns saying, I got it. And we found the person who could do it, right? So hold on to that thought for a second, because I'm going to get back to it in a little while. So for the last couple of years, we have all lived with the USASOC's vision for the future of ARSOF. Right? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of who has their dog-eared copy of ARSOF 2022 on their nightstand that they check every night and flip through it and see where they've tabbed and highlighted. Okay, because if you don't raise your hand and General Cleveland sees the video, you're probably going to be out of a job or dead. So we'll move past that. I'm going to assume that everybody understands it. I'm not going to review them in detail, but I will kind of highlight some of the important parts about what was said over the last couple of years. So ARSOF 2022 came out about 2 years ago, and ultimately it was focused on our tactical units and became our blueprint for change, right? It detailed all the things that we thought we needed to do to capitalize on our lessons learned from the last 14 years and to prepare for the future and what we thought the future operating environment would be, right? So in the shorthand, we refer to it as our blueprint for change, and in a way it described what we needed to do, right? About a year after that, so about a year ago, ARSOF 2022 Part 2 came out, and it was focused on institutional reform and developing soft capability at the operational level. And it detailed, like, I think 148, don't quote me on that, points that became our tasks and the solutions to the challenges we had identified as part of the ARSOF 2022 plan. And in a real sense, it showed people what we were trying to do, what our progress was, and where we were headed. And so it became our scorecard. And it described, in a manner of speaking, how we needed to do what we needed to do. And both of these documents and all of this plan was set within the context of the future operating environment, right? Despite the fact that humankind has yet to divine a way to reliably predict the future, we did, to the best of our ability, say what we thought the world would look like in the next 5 or maybe 10 years. Right? So as a result of all this, the changes that we attempted to implement at the speed and magnitude that we attempted to implement them, there was a tremendous amount of gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands and a lot of turmoil, right? I can ask anybody in here, and I'll be the first one to admit that it was pretty painful to go through all these changes. So there was a lot of turmoil. And at the end of that, the CG said, hey, look, when the dust settles, all right, when all this turmoil kind of tamps down, I want to refocus on what's most important about ARSOF. I want to refocus on people. And I don't want to talk about what we do and how we do it. I want to talk about that which inspires people to action, why we do it. Why do we do the things we do? Why do we believe what we believe? Why are we committed to the nation in such a special and unique way? Why do we exist, right? So ARSOF Next, a return to first principles, attempts to bring the ARSOF 2022 vision full circle. And it does so by asking, who are we and where do we come from? And it answers those questions by defining the characteristics of the ARSOF unit, the traits of the ARSOF soldier, and something we call the ARSOF promise to the nation. And it doesn't do it within the context of the future operating environment. It does it within the context of our shared collective history, so that we can demonstrate that not only are these the ideals to which we should aspire to in perpetuity, but these are the ideals that we should embrace and inculcate to our culture today, and they are the ideals that have always been part of who we are. From the first time we were conceived, from the very moment someone first uttered the phrase, special warrior. Now, when we started down this path at some point, I don't remember who did it, but somebody called me up and said, we were talking about this, and he said, hey, what is ARSOF Next supposed to do? And it was a confounding question, and I didn't really understand what he was getting after, but I think what he was really asking, and it helped me to clarify it later on, he was saying, why does it matter? Why does this stuff, who cares, right? And so that forced us to think about it a lot, because I wanted to be able to answer that intelligently when asked and in the document itself, right? And we came up with a lot of reasons. I'm going to highlight 3 of them for you here this morning. The first is the threat we face, right? The threat we face now and the threat we face for the foreseeable future is competing for dominion in our cognitive domain. Now, if that makes you throw up in your mouth a little bit, you are not alone. I hate phrases like that. It doesn't make sense. It's a lot of words. But the simple fact of the matter is, what we're talking about is that the threat we face now is trying to get inside our head, right? And they're trying to get inside our heart. And they target our minds and our hearts in the same way that they used to target our planes and our trucks. And they're seeking dominance in our cognitive space in the same way they sought dominance on the land or the sea or the air, right? And they do so armed with an ideology predicated on hate and extremism and violence. And so how do you counter that? Well, you counter that with an ironclad understanding of your own core ideology. You counter that by having a full recalling of who you are and where you come from. And so ARSOF Next, a return to first principles, starts us down the path of understanding what that core is, so we have that ideology to counter the other ideologies that are out there, because you can't do it if you don't have your own. Aside from what's happening outside of our borders, we have a couple of problems inside our own house, right? We have what I like to call an internal crisis of collaboration. Now, we didn't couch it that way in the publication because it's a little caustic, and I didn't make these up. I just pulled these off the internet because that's what's out there, right? We don't get along as well as we should. We don't play together as well as we should. Now, some people will argue that we've gotten a lot better at it over the last 10 years, and I would tell you, I think that's a function of operational necessity, not institutional reform, right? And General Tovo once said at a commander's conference, and he didn't say it to me, he says it all the time, when we're done with the fight we're in, we'll return to the fight we love with each other. We have to move away from this if we are going to make our whole greater than the sum of its parts. And so ARSOF Next arms us with an understanding and a language of what we all have in common. And it also, and I'll describe this here in a few minutes, it also talks about what we don't have in common and how that's important as well. In addition to our internal crisis of collaboration, we have an external crisis of identity, right? The people who we are ostensibly supposed to serve don't really know who we are. We're all this. We're John Wayne. We're John Rambo. Oh, it's all Black Hawk Down. Don't you do the same thing as the SEALs, right? That's how people perceive us. And I know that because we went out and asked. So in the same way that we address the internal crisis of collaboration, we move forward in addressing our external crisis of identity by helping people understand who we are and what we're about, right? And it arms you with a narrative that you can use to tell anybody, GCC, JTF, interagency, the Girl Scouts of America, whoever. It arms you with that narrative so that you can explain to them that ARSOF can be part of the solution to whatever problem they're experiencing, whatever complex, sticky, ugly problem they're experiencing, we can be part of the solution. And it's not because we drive dune buggies, we got Ops Corps helmets and lasers, or because we wear beards. It's not because of any of those things. It is because of the content of our character. It is because we have people like Captain Mike Kearns, who when he sees an obstacle and he knows what's right, you don't have to find the way for him. He says, I got it, and he's gone, right? And when we have those people, when we ensure that we adhere to those first principles, that we always choose the right people, we aggregate those people into these amazing teams and we rally those teams behind a special and unique purpose to the nation, then we will always be able to deliver world-class special warfare and surgical strike capabilities without fail. That's why this all matters. Okay, so how did we kind of get here and what did we discover? So this was like a 8-month process. If we had had more time, it could have easily been a 2-year process. Because there's a lot of information. And we started with trying to understand what the characteristics of the ARSOF unit were. And again, we did it within the context of our shared history. So we looked at our historical examples and we looked at our contemporary examples, and that's what we cited in ARSOF Next. But we started with kind of reviewing what was out there. And I'm telling you, people have been looking at the performance of of elite teams for generations, literally for thousands of years. We found things that date back to the Romans, where they were looking at, how do we rebuild discipline in the ranks by looking at the performance of small teams. It's been going on for years and years and years and years. And so logically, you would think, okay, well, if I have all that information, I just got to look through that and figure out the magic is in there somewhere. Somewhere I can make a comparison to what's being said in all this research to what we do every day. But here's the problem with that. The problem is that when you look at the research, particularly in modern times, at the end of all the research, they invariably say the same thing. They say, and if you really want to know what a high-performance team, what right looks like, go look at what? Special operations, right? So in all the studies are saying, oh, but these guys know how to do it best. So then what? Well, we just figured out we got to ask ourselves. General Cleveland is fond of saying, it's a real 1,000 points of light scenario, but I don't know how well that resonates with the crowd, but I can tell you that it really was. So what we did is we went out and we asked everybody in leadership that we could across the entire ARSOF enterprise. We went all the way back to retired GOs, to battalion level commanders across every CSC and CSU, went down to soldiers, and we said, hey, what makes these units great? What do we all have in common? And we got pages and pages and pages and pages of feedback. Actually, I didn't get a lot of feedback. I got one piece of feedback when I asked for it, and then when General Cleveland asked for it, my phone started ringing off the hook. So little tip for you if you're ever going to do this kind of research, go heavy early. But we got tons of feedback. We got tons of feedback from leaders. And what we determined, there were basically 4 things that people came back to time and time again: adaptability, autonomy, empathy, and expertise. Now, I'm here to tell you, you can argue about the words all you want, and people will. People will stand up and say, well, words matter, you have to pick the right word. And we killed ourselves, labored over picking the right word, and there's never going to be the perfect way to do it. It's the idea behind the word that matters, right? So when we talk about adaptability, you can call it any number of things. You can call it flexibility, you can call it adjustability, you can call it agility. It doesn't matter, okay? We settled on this because we thought it was the best overarching term, and it described what we were getting after the best. And all we're talking about here is we have an ability to change. Whether it's a small team, a large team, an individual, ARSOF has a unique ability to rapidly change, to adjust to virtually any situation that you find yourself in. And we use the example of the 1st Special Service Force to demonstrate this idea that it has always been one of our first principles because, and if there's any historians in here, I don't see any of you guys, but I'm probably going to donkey up the history because I'm not a historian. But they started out training for Operation Plow, which was blowing up hydroelectric dams in Norway in the snow. That got canceled, so they had to retrain for amphibious landing. That got changed. They went to Alaska. The Japanese weren't there. That got changed. And then finally, they ended up in the mountains of Italy. And so they demonstrate quite succinctly our ability to constantly change. But I don't need to go past my own experience as an ODA commander, right? Showing up in Kandahar, walking in thinking I'm doing X, Y, and Z in location B, and being told literally on the day that I arrived, no, you're going to go do, Q and T in location 0. And we all have that experience, and that's the point. Everybody can recollect the time when adaptability was the hallmark of what their unit was doing. And then autonomy. Autonomy is the idea that, we can operate decentralized, right? So again, fun with synonyms, Army semantics, call it what you will. Autonomy, decentralized operations, independence, right? We have that ability like no one else does. We can send out an individual or we can send out teams, and they can go out with just the intent and a smile on their face and get the mission done, right? They don't necessarily need a higher headquarters, despite the fact that we like to pile a bunch of headquarters on top of everything. They don't need it. We don't need it, ARSOF, right? And so autonomy, and in this case we used the Alamo Scouts. And we talk about a mission that they conducted in New Guinea in 1944 where they rescued like 66 civilians, hostages. We call it a hostage rescue now, but I think they just referred to it as a raid back then. They went in with 2 small teams. They were divided, no radio contact, no contact between the teams. Things didn't go exactly right, but everything at the end worked out perfectly. They rescued everybody. They lost not a man. They killed everybody that was on the objective. And it was because they understood exactly what they needed to do, and they had practiced and rehearsed, and they had the ability to operate autonomously, independently, decentralized, call it whatever you want. That's still resonant with us today and always will be. Empathy. This was a little bit of a tricky one because we could have gone with understanding your operational environment, but we didn't for 2 reasons. One, we wanted to divide it and separate it specifically from the soft imperatives because these things are distinct, right? They're resonant and they relate to one another, but we wanted to make a distinction. We didn't just want to rehash the soft imperatives. So we went with empathy because it applies to a couple different ways. One, it does demonstrate the ability to understand your operational environment, right? We can empathize with we can adjust to any environment, understand that environment. Doesn't matter if it's political, social, tribal, physiological, physical, geopolitical, whatever. We have the ability to go in and empathize with that and understand what's going on there. And in the same way, we have the ability to empathize with people. So our friends and partners, and, oh, by the way, our enemy. One of our distinctly unique characteristics is our ability to empathize with people across a spectrum. We, more so than anybody in ARSOF, can identify with our enemy, and we train to do so. We do what they would do so that we can understand what they're doing when they do it. So the idea of empathy covers both of those things, the operational environment, but also our ability to connect with people. And then our units are expertise. So we went out and I told you we asked a lot of people what they thought of ARSOF. And we conducted a ton of study groups, focus groups. We talked to congressional staffers. We talked to interagency, State Department. We talked to civilians, academics, on and on. We asked them, what do you think? And the one thing that we took away time after time after time was that they don't know exactly what we do, but they're sure we're really good at it, right? We're experts. They know we're experts. And if you ask the formation, and again, all of this information came from us, it came from our leaders, from our organizations. You ask the formation, they'll say, yeah, what we do up here. We are experts in every field. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about an ARSOF fueler or if you're talking about, a CAG operator, our level of expertise is hyper. It's way up here. And so that's a characteristic. So adaptability, autonomy, empathy, and expertise are the characteristics, the hallmarks of ARSOF units that have transcended time and identify us and make us different. That's part and parcel of our first principles. And then we wanted to figure out what all ARSOF soldiers had in common. That, boy, I tell you, that really was popular with a lot of people. I'm telling you, when we said, hey, we're going to go find out what we all have in common, I'm pretty sure I could hear like E-tools digging in the ground as they're digging fighting positions and filling sandbags, driving pickets. I mean, the defensive walls went up. Everyone's like, oh, no, we're not homogenous. You can't lump us all in together. It's not like that. We're distinct. And to a degree, I would accept that. But I have the data to prove otherwise because we looked into it. And we thought, well, what we'll do is we have the market cornered on assessment and selection, right? We're experts at this. No ifs, ands, or buts. Nobody assesses and selects like we do. We have like 60 years of science to back this up. So if we just take all that data from every CSC and CSU and we mash it all together, we'll be able to see what we all have in common, right? We'll just see what everybody's looking for. And we did that. And we found that there were 9 things that everybody was looking for, like professionalism, integrity, operational aptitude, team player, perseverance, all the things you would, unremarkable, you would remember from a poster you saw somewhere of ARSOF attributes, right? But there was a problem with that. 2 problems, really. One is that most people look at these things a little bit differently. So the way that SF looks at professionalism is a little different from the way that CA looks at professionalism, which is a little different than the way Rangers look at professionalism, so on and so forth. And so what we determined was that collective set of attributes told us more about what we didn't have in common than what we did have in common. But that was okay, and it was meaningful because we said, okay, well, that's an important fact to know. Because if you and I are in the same battle space, and we know a little bit more about how we look at things, and that gets us a little closer to a unity of purpose, if not a unity of organization. We may never be on the same, the same playing field organizationally, but at least purposefully we will be. So that information told us more about what we didn't have in common. And then the other problem was it was something else, right? Because we learned pretty quickly that if you're standing around the bar at Jumpers or the Green Beret Club with your CA buddy from 2004, you're not sitting around saying, oh man, remember that time we were, monuments to integrity? Nobody says that. No one's like, oh boy, no one's looking inside the mirror and saying, yeah, man, I am operationally astute. We don't say that because it's not in our gut, it's not in our heart, it's not what we feel about being part of this, right? So that stuff didn't work. There was something else. There was another thing that this science that we had got us to. And that was part of the problem. We couldn't figure out how do we put a finger on this feeling that we have inside, that we all have inside these people. Where are we going to discover this? And we figured out we're going to discover it in our stories. Because every one of these three things that I'm going to share with you now, I guarantee you have a story about it, that you know somebody that embodies this, or you believe it about yourself. So these attributes became discoverable through our stories. And they were difficult to do because we're trying to put a finger on a feeling, and people don't, that's a hard thing to do. It's uncomfortable and weird, and we don't codify it, we don't screen for it, we don't test for it, but it's there and we all know it's there. And the first one we discovered was toughness, right? ARSOF warriors are tough, mentally, morally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. They are hard people, right? They don't stay down when they're knocked down. And so for the examples we used, we cited a guy named Master Sergeant Chuck Ritter, who some of you may know, and at the time, Captain Roger Donlin, who was the first Medal of Honor awardee in Vietnam. And I'll let you read these stories, but let me just real quick summarize at least Chuck's story. So Master Sergeant Ritter went to Afghanistan on his third trip and was blown up in an IED, RG-33, thrown 50 feet, flipped upside down, 2 people inside killed, his head's broken in like 7 places, he loses all his teeth. He's a mess, an absolute mess. Takes him about 4 years and he recovers fully and returns to the team. Goes back to Afghanistan, and I think it was 2012, and is shot twice in the back with a PKM. And is medevaced out. I remember the medevac vividly. I was watching it from the Siege of Sodif, and it was hairy, and I remember Chuck being medevaced out. But he's shot in the back, brachial nerve complex severed, artery nicked, goes home, recovers. Comes back to Afghanistan again. Coming off a CH-47, shot through the hand. 7.62. I don't know if it's a PKM or AK-47, I don't know. Shot through the hand, refuses pain medication. Refuses to be evacuated because he thinks it's not that big of a deal, so that he can stay on the radio controlling fires and finish in the fight, right? Come to find out that hand was so badly damaged they had to revac him all the way back to the United States for recovery. And today, if you want to talk to Chuck Ritter about his injuries, his exploits, he'd be happy to talk to you about it. He's over in his team room, and if he's not there, it's because he's doing PT. And if he's, just don't try to talk to him in September, because he's going to Ranger School. I defy you to find a tougher example than this guy, but I promise you, you have your own example. And that's why we know that toughness is one of our common traits. And I would tell you, for any of you who had heard the original construct of what we were trying to achieve, we started out with the attributes of the ARSOF soldier, and we ended up calling it traits because we wanted to distinguish it from those things that we identified, those other 9 things that were attributes. We thought, well, we can't just tag these on as attributes. It'd be confusing and weird, so we have to separate them somehow, so we ended up calling them traits, just information. And then audacity. We make the bold choices that others won't make because they're too controversial, too unconventional, too unproven, too dangerous, right? We make those choices. We make the bold choices that others won't. And for these examples, we cited 2 things. One was Sergeant First Class Jerry Shriver. Jerry Mad Dog Shriver is a MAC-V SOG operator, disappeared in the jungle. I'm not going to cite the year because now it escapes me. And the other example we used was the 160th Objective Millionaire mission. And unfortunately, we couldn't use names because of classification reasons. But really, that story is about a mission that they conducted in northern Afghanistan to rescue a British national. So they brought British special operations guys, along with some of our guys, brought him into Objective Millionaire to rescue this guy. Helicopters just being shot all to hell, right? They take off, and after they take off, an operator is immediately killed. Now, there's no reason to go back for this guy. He's dead. We can wait until, you know, it's you know, the mouth of the dragon. We can wait until the mission is complete. You got the hostage, and then we'll come back and pick everybody up. That would have been perfectly reasonable, right? Nope. They turned right back around and headed back in to pick this guy up. Fortunately, that he was the only casualty. So we make those bold choices, right? ARSOF soldiers are audacious. And this is the one that gets everybody's eyes rolling, right? ARSOF's capacity for love. Because every time you say it to an ARSOF warrior, what does he do? He does this. He says, oh, well, yeah, Paul, you can, it's all about the love, yeah, but you can't say that, right? And then you continue to have this conversation with them, and you know what happens invariably? They reintroduce the word themselves into the conversation along the lines of, yeah, well, but you know, but I love my guys. You know what I mean? Because the simple reality is that ARSOF has a capacity for love that is unique in its intensity, right? Love for country, love for their job, love for their mission, their families, and most of all, love for their ARSOF brothers and sisters in arms, right? We have struggled forever to find a more acceptable word for love. Devotion, passion, commitment, right? But the simple fact of the matter is, it is part of who we are. It is that invisible, intangible core, that sphere that somehow resides in front of people as an aggregate of toughness, audacity, and love that we can't quite put our fingers on. We don't like to talk about it because it's weird and it's feelings and it's difficult to say. But I'm telling you that this absolutely is part of who we are. And for the examples of this, we use a couple. The first one is a young soldier from the 75th Ranger Regiment talking about returning from Afghanistan. They're in a C-17, landing on July the 4th in Savannah, looking out the windows. They can see the fireworks going off, and they know what's happening down there. Everybody's at a picnic having a good time, right? And they know it's all happening. And again, a staff sergeant who asked us not to use his name in the publication, bursts out into the Star-Spangled Banner, right? And the way the kid says it is, everybody joined in. 60 of the world's most lethal men jumping. You know, that's the language of youth, right? That's like the 60 of the most if it was me and my buddies, it'd be like 60 of the most tired, old sons of bitches, you know. But this kid was, you know, 60 of the most lethal men in the world bursting into this song. And he says there was nowhere, no picnic, no celebration, no trip on the beach, nowhere in the world he would have rather been at that moment than in that plane. And he says, that's the moment I fell in love with America. And he says it was like falling in love with a girl for the first time. And no measure of discord, political, social, economic, whatever in this country could make him fall out of love for America. And the other example that we use is Shugart Gordon. I don't even need to tell this story. It's so much part of our lore, right? Somalia, 1993, Black Hawk, I mean, it's the movie. The Black Hawk goes down, and these two guys in sniper positions from the air say, hey, we need to go in to defend that crew. They're not against the odds. The odds are zero. There are no odds. They're not going to make it, and they know it, and they're refused. They can't go in. They ask again, refused again. So they ask 3 times, right? Everybody knows this story. They ask 3 times, and in they go to defend these guys and ultimately give their lives in defense of a crew that was ultimately doomed. And why did they do it? Well, I'll tell you why they did it. They didn't do it because they're patriotic. They didn't do it because, you know, they really believe in the mission. They didn't do it because, you know, they respected their peers. They did it while we all do it, right? People don't sacrifice their lives for those things. They sacrifice their lives because they love their country, they love their job, and they love their brothers in arms, right? It is undeniably a part of who we are, and it is important to introduce it to our lexicon. And I would argue with anybody who tells me that there's a better way to express it. So when you're doing a presentation like this, the best thing that can happen for you is one of your buddies comes up to you and says, hey, I got a great idea for you to introduce at the last minute. So you throws the whole thing into his tailspin, right? But then I realized no one would know that I screwed it up except him, so I'm going to use it anyway. So he said to me, hey, look, here's kind of the thing about ARSOF that I use a lot, and it's really good. And he said, if you take the average person in an organization, let's say some computer programmer in Microsoft in Seattle, and say, hey, man, we need you to get this brick of code over to, you know, the other side of town, okay? Take that over there. And oh, by the way, when you do that, There's a bunch of IEDs right over here. There's been a lot of them. We lost 3 guys last week. And then over here, we call this ambush alley. Watch out, there's probably going to be an ambush if you go at like 6 in the morning. The terrain over here is untenable. I mean, you're going to lose vehicles, you go there. And then when you get above that, that's when it gets really dangerous. What do you think that guy's going to say? Say, yeah, no thank you. I'm not going to do that. And when you say, well, no, don't worry about it. We're going to give you an extra $100,000 to do it. What is he going to say? Yeah, it's no thank you. I'm not going to do it. But you take that same concept and you apply it to any ARSOF warrior, E6 on a support team, who needs to get 500 gallons of fuel from Kandahar to Panjwai. And you say, hey man, I need you to take this fuel tomorrow, and here's the IEDs, and here's the ambushes, and here's the untenable terrain, and it gets really dangerous past this point. What's that kid going to say to you? I got it, right? Because somewhere along the line, he's made a promise, and he has made a covenant, not in front of a flag with his hand up. He's made that covenant with his brothers and sisters in arms, and more importantly, he's made that covenant with himself, right? That he will do what is necessary to protect the nation. He'll do it without taking counsel of his fears. There is no way he will allow himself to fail, and he will do it in a way that no one else will do it. I got it. And that's the ARSOF promise to the nation.